Wonderful. So this is cleverly titled Top X, which means if people run over or run short, I can cut and change the amount of tips we give as and when. So I've not promised you a specific amount. So the name of this is very purposely done like that. So this is the Top X data quality tips. So yeah, thank you for everyone for coming. Quick thing about me, won't dwell on it too much. Full stack developer, so back end, front end, also through the machines, everything like that. Finally, our team and that I help lead, we are now on 8 apps on AppSource. So we've spent a long time learning things the Microsoft way, doing things the proper way without any of the special hacks that people do online. So proud to do that. The author of a Power Automate connector, so that's in there, and then finally an XRM Toolbox app as well. So I've done a bunch of stuff around the community for a couple of years. So that's me, and there's my Twitter there if you've got any questions off the back of this. So what's the point? What's the point of what I'm talking about right now? Basically, the point is that data quality isn't that hard, but it's given this horrible stigma that people can't do it, people don't like to do it, and people's systems get ruined because of it. So this is just trying to say that you don't worry about it. If you plan it and you can get practices into place, then actually it's not that bad. And sometimes a lot of people will suggest things, and I've seen these sort of mythbuster things where people will suggest that a specific tip is the best way of doing it, and actually sometimes they're not, and Chinese whispers makes things worse and worse. So don't necessarily believe everything you read. It is never too late to start all this sort of stuff. So if you're in your system that you're going to keep for a long time, it's fine. You can still sort at this point. You don't have to be at a migration point to do it. A lot of people think I'm already here, let's not start. That's not true. I've worked in my role now for too long, 8-9 years. I have worked on hundreds, if at this point not thousands, of projects. So I've seen all sorts of things go wrong. I've seen the mistakes people make. So what this session is about is things that I've seen over that time. Every tip won't apply to every person. People in this session will massively disagree with some of the tips that I give, and that's fine. Generally, my stock answer to most of your questions is probably going to be, it depends. As we all know, people like to answer that. But there's some things you hopefully see through this that you think, oh, actually, that's really not that difficult. And there's bits in it, there's some code in it, there's some JavaScript in it, there's some front-end stuff in it. So there's a bit for everyone. This isn't tailored specifically to developers or to marketers or different roles like that. Disclaimer within this is that because I do work for a data quality company, some of the screenshots I've used are using our tools because they're what I have available to me. There are other people out there that do the same things we do, and I will talk about them as and when. I'm just using the subject matter that I have available to me. So if you see stuff in there that's ours, that's why it's in there. So I'd just like to clarify that before I start. This is a stat I always use in a few places, and I think it's crazy. 600 billion cost per year for US businesses use data quality problems. That's 600 billion. That's just the US. That scales around the world. It's a fairly vague term, data quality problems, but the point is that there's little bits you can fix. If you fix little bits, the money starts changing, and at the end of the day, that's what everybody cares about, right? Is that every business wants to make the most money it can. So we'll just reel off through tips. If I start getting run out of time, someone interrupt me and I can skip over tips. Between tips, if people have questions, feel free to shout them out. Whoever's moderating this, I have no problems with that at all. So the very first thing to care about is that this is your problem. You use your system, so this is your problem. But it's not only your problem, it is also your colleague's problem, and it's actually everybody's problem. Everybody in a business is in some way going to be affected by the quality of the data in your system. The thing I've seen work the best, and this is the tip number one, is if you can have somebody own it in your system, somebody that it actually cares about it and really cares about it, it helps a lot. If you just have a minimum standard and that one person does it and prioritize it as well. So middle name, how many of you really have used middle name? Let's be honest, but mobile phone, I imagine you've used quite a lot. So have someone own it. That is the takeaway from this. If you're on this now, hopefully you care enough to think, I do care. So even if you pass it on to somebody else and say, we've got a problem here, you've at least owned it and moved it on and managed it. So that's what we're saying there. And in your system, if people see the data is not trustworthy, then they don't care themselves. They know that other people are quite frankly entering crap into their system. So what benefit do they have of entering it well themselves? Whereas if they see the data is good, that there is only one of a specific person and their phone number rings, then they're a bit more incentivized to do so. And incentivizing people to do it is another way that we're going to shortly, which is this point here. Include it in performance reviews. It doesn't necessarily need to be an important thing, but just mention it to people. Make people realize they care about it, and they have to care about it. Very rarely, if you have got a human entering data, and let's say you've got a call center, or you're yourself entering data, or your team are, poor data or bad data or fake data, no one enters that without knowing it's fake. The people know when they're putting the dots in for these fields, and they know when they're putting the first name in. So if you can force people to think about why they're doing that, then it always helps. So there's different ways you can do that, and sort of monitoring performance reviews and some of those things come up later on. Don't wait. Start now. Data gets worse every single day. Data gets worse. People move jobs. People lose their jobs. People change their phones. People move phone numbers. People move countries. Some statistics that we found that I will link the source to at some point is that 30% of people change jobs in a year. 34% of people change their job titles. So if you're tailoring your stuff for people's job roles, chances are if you've not touched everything in your system, a third of it is out of date within a year. So don't just think you've done it. Start it now and keep it going. It doesn't just end. So there is some quick wins you can have. There's things you can do, and you can do them in half an hour. You can do them in an hour or so, and you'll improve vast parts of your system. But on the flip side of that, there is things that will take much longer to do. And this is where the planning comes into place. So my number one tip to do with actual data structure is single customer view, or what you define as a single customer view. There is legitimate reasons, and I've worked on many a project where the same person should be in a system three or four times based on certain criteria. I've certainly worked with exam boards where they have to be in there as a teacher and an exam marker, for example. That doesn't stop them being able to have this single customer view. It's just the definition of the word single customer potentially changes. But this is where, to me, you should spend the time. This is the most important bit of everything going forward. Because if you've got the dupes in there, not only is your mail and your other campaigns going to go wrong, GDPR is going to come and bite you on the arse at some point. If you've got someone that's tried to give you their right to erasure and you've handled that in their system, but then you've accidentally missed the second one in there and you contact them, then you've got a mess on your hands that you don't really want to have to deal with. So it's not just about your marketing, not just about your sales, but actually your legal side of it is sometimes just as important to that side of stuff. So think about that. Now, the single customer view, it's not. Oh, no, we're good. So the thing about the single customer is, like I say, it's never too late. You can do it in your current system. So what you need to do, you've got a two-pronged approach, which is you need to fix everything that's already in there, and you also need to stop them coming back in the future. The CDS, the D365, whatever I'm supposed to call this platform at this point, has it in place. You've seen the duplicate detection rules, you've seen the merge rules, they have it in place. But what you do is you need to be aware. So there's some caveats that we'll go on to now. So I always find this interesting to show, and sorry if that animation breaks your screen because I know how well that works virtually. This is 13 years of difference in dynamics. So it's safe to say that within Microsoft, they haven't devoted a massive amount of resource into fixing this area because they think it does a pretty good job. Part of me begs to disagree, but it's still useful to see that you can see this is 13 years of development. Bonus points if anybody did spot the single change, which was there, which is that you can now exclude inactive matching records. So that's cool. But the unified interface is here to save the day, except it doesn't in there. It just refers you straight to legacy, so you've got nothing new coming, I'm afraid. And as far as I'm aware, I was chatting with Ryan Jones back in Orlando in October time. This isn't due to change any time soon, at least that I know of officially. So who knows? Fixing data historically, again, finding your duplicates, doing all that sort of stuff. This is your interface changes in 13 years. So this is, I'm afraid, what you've got to deal with. Bear in mind that if you can go back to CM4, you can actually get more data on your screen. So yeah, you might want to go back to CM4 because it actually makes it easier. Let's not tell them that. And unified interface, yeah, same. Sadly, you are going straight back into legacy stuff. So finally, merging. How many people do you see and you only have 2 duplicates in your system? Yeah, it's generally 3, 4, 5, or 6, or even more. If you've got a bad integration, you've got a bad integration, and it's going to make lots of them. Or if you've got a bad sales team, it's going to make lots of them. Hopefully that they're willing to merge records 2 at a time, with the exception of case for some reason, which you can merge many of. I'm not quite sure why case is the difference one there. But yeah, all you can do is pick left or right. So one of the arguments I often have with people at this point is that if they've got an email 1 and an email 2, and they're different on those 2 records, you have to knowingly select to lose one of that bit of data. So again, there is holes in the system. And the good news is that this is a unified interface. The bad news is it looks identical. So it's slightly been updated. So it doesn't quite take it to legacy, but it's basically the same. So that's the one thing you've got to bear in mind. So spend the time doing this, think about it. But you are got some limitations. The other thing you've got is names. People's names don't always work with first and last characters, which is all you've really got. So yeah, think of your Rich and your Richies, and to use my daughter, she's a good one. Harriet and Hattie, that often is a difficult match to get. And typos and names and that sort of stuff. So my suggestion is there is third parties out there that do this to a better job. There is multiple out there. I'm not even going to name any of them. It's not hard to Google them. But just think about it. If you can use out the box, great. If that works for your system and your team, then great. But don't be afraid to engage with the people that can do a better job than this, and this is where they make their living. And the problem with the Sync Custom View is if you've got it bad, it's only going to get worse. They've got no plans to invest it. And also, this is a D365 user group, so I'm sure you've seen all those windows I've just spoke about. With the way this community, this industry is changing right now, this isn't just how this works anymore. People don't just live in these nice little model-driven apps and just use account, contact, lead, case. If you've got a custom entity, you might want to merge that. You can't. If you have a different system where you've got a CDS, but you're not just using model-driven apps, what if you've got Canvas apps with the SharePoint backend, which I know is a lovely subject for lots of people that listen to this right now? You can't do it. So you need to think about this isn't just the case. There is many places that they could be used. And also, people still like Excel. If I could uninstall Excel from people's PCs, I would. But some people like storing Excel spreadsheets and saving them on the remote server, and that's where they leave their stuff. Even though they've got a nice system to use, they don't like to do it. So, actual substance of stuff that's in there now. Required fields. I hate required fields. I will put it on record right now that I hate required fields, and they will cause more of a problem than they fix. If they're lookups, fine, all right. I might let you have that because you can manage the source slightly better. But I still hate required fields, and they will cause problems. Avoid using required on factual fields. This is a hard thing to explain, but I think it absolutely makes sense. Telephone number on a contact. That is a fact. That is a number that will ring for them. The problem you've got is if you require that and you don't know it, people put in rubbish. Probability and opportunity, it's an opinion. This isn't a fact. This is what your salesperson thinks that chance of closing is. I understand the need for that to be required. And if they put it in and make it wrong, so what? All right, fine. Your sales report might be slightly out or whatever, but you've not decreased the quality. Your marketing team aren't going to come to you and go, I tried to ring this person, you said I could and I can't. So required on factual, I think, is a difficult one, and I would try and stay away from it if I can. The other thing is that if you're clever, and I've certainly seen a bunch of devs on this call right now, they're not that hard to ignore. They're only client-side enforced. If you've got the SDK, if you've got one of the PowerPane or one of those tools that people are using, or the JavaScript bookmarklets that people that live in this world use, then it's really not that difficult to get around the requiredness. So you can't use it as gospel. So yeah, use them, but just think about them. And I think I'm going to take a point. At least 50% of people on this call have had this question. Can we make a change to our form and make this field required because I want to start using it in my reporting? Wonderful. My one tip for this, and I say it that that strongly that I will put in capitals is please never do this if you really care. This will only promote that bad quality. Fine, it will make somebody. It will make somebody. What's the word I'm thinking of? It will make somebody forced into updating that record. But the problem you've got is that if the field that is now become required isn't populated, you can't save the record. So what do? Either empty crap or close the record. So really, this is super hard. There is going to be reasons you genuinely do need this. And if that's the case, I think there's better ways around it than the required side of system. You can use business rules, you can use JavaScript. Because it's client side, you can dynamically make this required a thing. So certainly what I've seen do in the past is people say if a certain criteria is met, then it becomes required. Now you can put things like Canvas apps into model-driven apps. I think you can do this even cleverer. I just find this super difficult to do. Populate fields does not increase with data quality. I can see the Hosk asking the question because I've got the chat down below. I'm trying to see ones as I'm saying is bad data better than no data? I don't think so. I think if your marketing team really care about who they're marketing to, and they email what the statistics say is 100,000 people and they get massive bounce rate, they're going to go, why am I getting bounces? I would rather. What does bad data gain you? It gains you nothing. All it does is gives you false promises. If you want to look at the percentage of your users that have a phone number, then having them wrong in there, you're just going to misrepresent your entire business and say you're in a better state than where you are. And yes, there's a good point there, which is you can see missing data, you can't see bad data. So that's an absolutely great point as well. So I'm trying to catch questions as I'm going. I'm juggling multiple screens, so if I do miss any, don't take offense. Because how many times has anybody in the call seen this? That's fantastic. Or how many times have you seen that? Or how many times have you seen that? If I'm going to use an integration with a system, and this goes to your printers, and then there you go. This might even get as far as the post box, and you've still gone, oh no, it's Royal Mail are going to just laugh at it and do whatever they do with letters that don't get there. So my tip for that is validate at the point of entry. So if there is multiple ways of doing this, you can do your JavaScript, you can do your plugins, you can do whatever, but just think about having data validated at the point you put it in. At this point, everyone's thinking regex is. Regex is fine, it works, but it's not a fix. It's an improvement, absolutely, but this isn't a fix. Test.example.com will pass pretty much every regex you write, unless you specifically write the case for that. But then you're going to get into a massive ball ache, quite frankly, of different example domains of example and test and that sort of stuff. And the same for mobile numbers, 07777. That will match people's regexes. So fine, I'm not saying don't do it, but what I'm saying is there is systems out there that do exist that will literally tell you if it's real or not, even if it looks it. So I know that because we build one of them. And there's some screenshots of how that looks in a second. But regex is fine, but just think about going further to it. But think outside your system as well. You've probably got other integrations, right? This generally, a lot of people have multiple points of entry for the system and the integrations that do it, whether it be portals or third-party integrations that's using the SDK or whatever. If you are going to use a third party, or if you're going to use a system, be it regex, whatever that's there, use that same rule everywhere you possibly can, because at the end of the day, what's the saying that says water always finds its way through to the ground? Or there is a saying of some sort that I always forget, which basically means is that if users know there is a way to get in your system by skipping and bypassing the validation and the checking, they will find it and they will use it. So try and be consistent in every way you can. So that was my tipper there. So yes, that's my populated field stuff. There is a library next to them. So this is a bit codey for the first time. That I think a lot of people don't use, and I think you can use it to your advantage massively, which is stopping people saving. There's a bit of code there if you really want to see it, but basically you can offer feedback onto the screen. You can do what it needs to do. So you can see here, this is using our tool. That's my old mobile number that's disconnected from the mobile network. That would pass every single regex you could throw it, pretty much. But we've still prevented the save because we've literally spoken to the mobile phone provider, and it's gone. Nope, you can't do that. So it's thrown as invalid, so I can't save that record. So that's a nice little thing that's there. But invalid isn't the only option. There is one even more that I think gets missed even more, and I think it's because it can be sometimes difficult to use, which is the recommendations. So this is one that we see where this is a typo. Because I've got all the fields on the screen, people generally do their emails in certain ways. So you can see that my fat fingers as I'm typing have missed a character. So what we've done is we've gone, are you sure you didn't mean that? We're not strict enough to go, whoa, stop, that's definitely wrong. But what we've done is we've helped you go, just have a think about that a minute. Are you sure you didn't mean that? And what you can do with this is you can make all sorts of different ways, so that you can make that apply so it sets that new value in there. But that recommendation step, there is all sorts of things you can do within that step to assist your users. At the end of the day, this is all you're trying to do. Is you want to assist your users. You don't want to hinder them. You want to make their lives easy. If their life is easier, your life is easier. So recommendations is a good thing that I think is criminally underused. Key presses. If every time someone presses a key, they've got the chance of putting a bad bit of data in their system. Let's be honest, if they're typing, the less time they have to do a key press, then the less room they have in for the bad data creep. There was a fantastic tool for this. It was autocomplete. Autocomplete could look in your system. It could be used JavaScript and what it could do. And I have no idea how this will go on a virtual team. So if this looks terrible, I apologize. But this is in the old interface that you can see. This is autocompleting an address as you type in. So what I've got here is on 3, 4, 5 characters, I've got a full UK address and it's in the right place and that sort of stuff. So that was using an out-of-the-box framework that was provided to us, except what they decided to do was they deprecated it and removed it entirely from UCI. So on-premise people, yeah, you can still go and use that. It's great. But sadly, it's your UCI, you're not. However, having said that, PCF is here. PCF is growing. PCFR is really taking shape now. If you've ever looked at the PCF gallery, you can absolutely go and see some amazing stuff. My argument should be the PAFC now because they've separated power apps with a space, but that's an argument for a different time. So what you can do with this is anything you want. So one of the things that we've certainly done with one of our tools, and that's the tool you saw the second earlier, was that you can make a control that does this drop-down box, this autocomplete.
Sorry, quick question from Ben Hoskin.
Yep.
Why did they deprecate autocomplete?
You have to ask Microsoft, I'm afraid. It would have been nice to have known why. I have no idea. I would have liked to have kept it myself because it would have saved me a whole bunch of work. There is a few caveats with the PCF it's worth adding. So if you are going to remake that address thing, you can't still use it on address fields. That because of the composite, they have a few limitations. But there is very easy ways around that. That you use it sort of on a third-party field, and then a bit of JavaScript can set it, which is certainly what we do in our third-party solution. So you can absolutely still remake all this sort of stuff. And there's a new one that I saw the other day, which actually 2 people released on the same day. So I'm guessing there's been a discussion and they've raced to do it, which was having a checkbox that is actually a date time. This is where the PCF can really grow and really make your data a level above again. That document sent on here is just a tick box, but actually behind the scenes that's stored as a date time. That's just a simple example of where PCF can go, but PCF is really going to, I think, change people's lives in the system at some point. It can make a system look very colourful if people go a bit crazy. So I try and rein it in and stay within the same branding because no one wants massive green icons all over their screen. But you can see here, I think this one is by Tanguy, who's the guy that actually makes XRM Toolbox. It's nice and simple, but the actual extra bit that adds on top is huge. So if you can just do that for a checkbox, imagine how else you can improve all your other stuff. So for deprecated things that exist in the past, yeah, absolutely. Go and check out PCF Gallery if you've not already done that. And if you're online, if you're on premise, Sorry. Standardize your formatting. Nobody can ever type a phone number out the same way. I've seen people do it in all sorts of variations of things. So what ideally is good is sit down, what is the best way for your system, and try and enforce that wherever you can. Train your users. If your method of training is to whip them to make them better, then do that. If it's to give them a stick and to give them a carrot and reward them, do that. But try and enforce that wherever you can. If you're clever and you've got the capacity to do it, auto standardize it. You could write a plugin, you can use third parties, you can do all sorts of things you want. That takes the emphasis away from the user and means they've got to do it. But absolutely try and auto standardize stuff where you can. Because this helps in all sorts of places. Have you ever tried to do an advanced find by phone number? The best way I've ever found to do it is ends with, because I think it ends with that. But then even then, if people are going to start putting extension numbers in the phone number field, you're still stuck for it. All right, fine, contains, but you're opening yourself up to a world of hurt if you've only got 3 or 4 characters from it. Data extract and imports, again, if it's standardized, it's been better. And if you've got CTI solutions, I've certainly seen CTI solutions that need the format in very specific ways. So think about that. And I know that at some point the Intelli CTI, whatever it's called, that the QGate guys do, that needed it in a certain format at some point. That may have since changed, but as one example of a CTI solution that I know of that did need that. So think about that. So this is an example of one, again, that we use internally. This is my sample data. And you can see that as I type a phone number out and I hit save, what I will do is that's refreshed it into an international format with spaces in the right places. It means the users don't need to worry about it. If you've got international data, that's even better, because I would have absolutely no idea how to write a Canadian phone number or a US phone number, and even less about some of the European phone numbers. So this is certainly one we use internally, which is we automatically will classify it straight into US format. Into the international format. So yes, that's it for formatting. Dashboards. Use dashboards to your advantage. There is a tip, and I honestly think it was the first ever tip I got taught on the first ever CIRM user group I attended a good 7 or 8 years ago, back in the days of Adam Vero, who always gets a name check at this point because he gets the credit for this, which is empty dashboards can be just as effective as full ones. Full dashboards are nice, they're colourful, green is good, red is bad, all that sort of stuff that people are doing, and your sales pipeline funnel is better at the bottom than the top, or other way around. I no idea, don't do sales. But then empty dashboards can also show that you've got nothing left to do. So flick it on its head. So one of the things we mentioned very early on was this idea of make a data standard, make people care about it, make it part of people's requirements to work, because what you can do with that is if people have it active there and they can see they've got 5,000 plus, because that's what they'll see, contacts that their data doesn't match up to the standard required by the business, then they've been prompted. They can't plead ignorance. You can pull it out and you can put your own dashboard on that and say which are your worst performers. So you can evidence what you need. So this is actually a dashboard we've got in our system, and I will admit I had 10 when I last checked this that I needed to cleanse myself. So that literally is something that we use internally. Again, so I had to blur it because that's a real screenshot of my terrible system. So yes, think about empty dashboards as well. What else have we got? Your existing data. So this sort of comes back to what I was saying earlier, which is that your data decays over time, and I would say 99.99% of your data goes untouched in a day. You don't go nowhere near it. You use the bits you need, and that's about it. So you're not going to know it's decaying. And the other thing you've got to bear in mind as well is decay is that things change. So there is legal requirements on things you do. If you're UK based, this is a UK based user group. You may have heard of the TPS. You may have heard of the CTPS. If you're adhering to TPS law, what was not on the TPS yesterday could be on the TPS today. And if you've not adhered to that and you repeatedly do that, then you might have a problem. The other thing that people will make a lot of decisions on is credit limits, credit ratings, that sort of stuff. And if you've got integrations in your system that contain that sort of stuff, they can change on a daily basis. And let's be honest, in the current climate right now, everything is changing. So think about the constant updates. Now, if only there was a platform in place that allowed you to do things in batch across your system. Power Automate. Power Automate is great for this. If you've between third-party connectors, between custom connectors, and all that sort of stuff, you can really use that to your advantage. So I mentioned that we've got a flow connector out there. I put it out there. I mainly put it out there because I actually built it for us. And when I realized quite how easy it was to put in a custom connector to the public world, I just did it. So I literally submitted it because we own the core API behind the scenes. I was able to submit that for authentication. So what you can see there is that this is a flow that we can trigger on a schedule that goes through all of our system, just checks the emails are still valid, and then updates accordingly. So it's a super simple one that I can just run on a schedule whenever I want to and just keep up to date with my data. I can validate TPSs, I can check credit ratings, I can do all sorts of stuff. There's a few data quality people in Power Automate already. Or like I say, if you've got specific things internally and you're clever and you can use a custom connector, then you can even build your own. So absolutely do that. For the sysadmins in us, changing metadata can cause you major problems and you will not even realize you've done it. The second point of this, deactivating your duplicate detection rules, will have stung most people at some point, I would imagine. You add a new field to a contact or you do something else, then it decides to randomly unpublish all of your duplicate detection rules. You've then got a period of time at some point, you're getting duplicates, your users think they're doing it the right way. So changing metadata can cause you umpteen problems when you're doing this. Other things that it will let you do without any validation whatsoever. You can change the length of a text field. You can change the min-max of a number, and you can remove option set values. There is absolutely no validation when you do this. You just go into the user interface of the back end, you make the change, you run it through, you press save, the system goes, making the change, and it's completed it through. The problem you've got that's even worse now is that because you're making this change at a metadata level, if your data, this doesn't change your database, the data that's in your database is still in there. I still have a database. They may have it more magically than a database. Who knows at this point? But it won't amend the data that's in your system. But what it will do is make that record almost be unusable. So this is an example here. This is me doing website URL in the old interface because I've not updated my slides. But let's be honest, most of us switch to Classic anyway and don't pretend you don't. So what I've done here is I've got website URL that is by default 200 characters. And in this example, I've knocked it down to 180 because my sales guy said, let's be honest, no one can have a 200 character URL. It should be 180 instead. So I've made that change and I've done that change. It lets me do that without complaining whatsoever. I go on that record and I enter it in something else. I put an email address in. I try and save the record. I get that warning. Again, old interface. Sorry, you would get that on the new one. So you now have to go and make the effort to go and fix that problem. It might not be able to be fixable because that might be a legitimate 200 character website URL. All right, in this example, it's a stupid field to use, but if you've made name smaller, then you've got serious things to think about. And the system has now done that for you. You have broken your system. If you're doing min-max, same problems happen. And if you're doing option sets, it's even weirder. Mark Carrington, my colleague, did a great talk on this whenever the London user group was, which was what happens is the value is still stored in the database, but on your screen, it doesn't show. So if you were to do an advanced find that said, and address type contains data, it would show in there. You enter the record and look at it, you don't see the text because behind the scenes has the number, but it doesn't have the text in front of it. So option sets, I can think, can be even worse. For the techies among us, if you're curious, and this might be going away at some point, but people still like the data export validation tool, and this is sort of the tool I built, so this is why I know so much about this. If you increase the boundary, so if you make a 200 character field be 250, that will make a database level column edit. It will make that varchar 250 over varchar 200 or whatever it's doing. If you decrease it, it only changes at a metadata level because it doesn't want to truncate the data that's in there. Now, if you use the data export validation service, what that does is that literally will build you up a create table statement based on the metadata, which means it will make you a create table with a column length that is too short. So as soon as your data starts synchronizing through, you hit a problem. So yes, don't do that because it will cause all sorts of problems. So one of the tools I built helps you try and get ahead of this. So there's a little screenshot here, so you can see what we're seeing here is fields on the left-hand side. You can see that there's a field I call random number because it's just for the demo. And you can see that the min-max I changed. So on the right-hand side, all these records now have invalidated. They have the number 8 in there, which doesn't now match the metadata behind the system. So you have to go and fix all these bits of data before you can use a bunch of your system. And this will highlight option sets you've got wrong and this and that. So this is sort of that. So it can cause a write problem, and you will need to fix it. You'd like to fix it in batch, right? So now, how do we get onto that? So what I can now talk about is looking at your data. So looking at your data in a way you've not been able to before, because let's be honest, you are limited by, unless you've done some clever hacking in your system, which I know you can do on premise, you are limited by 250. All right, fine. Or you can export it to Excel if you really want to. Or if you're very naughty, you've got access to the on-premise SQL database, but we don't talk about those things nowadays. But you can learn a lot from that. If you can start really grouping it together, you can learn more from an Excel spreadsheet than you can learn from a pretty sort of CRM web front end. And also, there is limitation. So you're online. You don't have access to the raw data. You are also at the behest of fetch XML if you're using the advanced find stuff. So imagine you had this problem where you had an account with a primary contact, but that primary contact account isn't that account. Does that make sense? Because all that is a lockup from account to contact. So I could have a Matt Beard, I could have a Data 8 account that Matt Beard works for, but then if I open the Matt Beard contact, he could work for somebody else entirely different. That match doesn't make sense. He shouldn't be the primary contact of somebody he doesn't work for, but that's entirely possible. Ben Hosk, you're ahead of me. So the problem you've got with that is how do you solve that? You can't do that sort of dynamic filtering in Fetch XML. You probably can in query expression, but then you've got to think how you're going to handle the ins and outs of it. So what the big thing that Embass announced recently was that you can use SQL to query data. They've got a new SQL connector. You can hook into it through SQL Server Management Studio. You can see your data. You can write SQL commands. This is brand new. This was literally announced last week. We've played with it today. Joe and Mark, Joe Griffin, who is on here, certainly spent a bunch of time today getting it working between them. They've managed to break it already, which is fine. That's the point of it being preview, right? Is that we're going to try and fix it and break it and make it better for live. But at the same time, there is other options out there. So what you can do, this is an example you can do, is that you can do join to a contact, and you can see the last point in that SQL if you can write SQL, where c.parent customer ID does not equal a.account ID. That is the bit that is impossible to do in Fetch XML because it's dynamic. So you can go and use SQL you can absolutely use the SQL connector, but it's incomplete and you might crash your system, and also it's read only. So absolutely great. You can go and find that. You then return 100,000 records as your problems. What are you supposed to do with that? Export it out and make some sort of flow or something. So the SQL stuff that's coming is great, but there is a tool out there right now. So I'm going to plug Mark's stuff right now, which is the SQL for CDS. This is already in XRM Toolbox now, and this does everything it does already. So his thunder got stolen slightly when this announcement came out. He's had better days. However, what this does have is things like CRUD updates, which you couldn't previously do. So it's a little cheap plug for that you can now see there that this is in XRM Toolbox. I'm doing a select statement. I'm doing a select count. This is all done natively in the SQL for CDS. What this is doing is this is going to talk about this is going to convert to Fetch XML where it can. It then knows it can't be Fetch XML, so it then converts to query expressions and all sorts of stuff. So you can do updates, deletes, creates. You can literally write this. I've not been able to break. I do any SQL I want of this. So absolutely check out SQL for CDS. SQL, the connector will be the right way of doing this in the fullness of time, as is the famous Microsoft phrase. In the meantime, you don't have to wait. There is tools out there that still do it for you now. So think about them. Don't be scared to go and do them.
Matt, sorry, this is Greg. We've run out of time. I lost track of time. We are at the limit.
Okay, that's fine. I've got one more slide, which is don't be scared to talk to people. And that is me done. So I can take questions. I will stick around to the end of Alison so I can be in the chat as well.
Yeah, if you're around, Matt, that'd be good, because hopefully we'll get loads of questions at the end.
Yeah.
Again, somebody trying to do. You could have done a whole presentation just on the SQL bit at the end. It crammed a lot in. Well done.
Yeah, so if you do want to do that, Mark did a proper 45-minute one on it last week. So I think that's on the D365 UG's YouTube account. So go and check that. That's a full session dedicated to that for him.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Matt. And I guess we should unmute again.
Thanks, Matt.
Cheers, Matt.